Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. As always, support the podcast. I need your support. You can donate through the website or become a paid subscriber on the Substack. I do a weekly analysis and video format, about an hour to an hour and a half of the world's of the main events going on around the world. We also do Zoom chats with supporters only, where it's sort of a conspiracy therapy, you can say. Do check out my affiliates and purchase a consult if you want to chat with me about whatever you like: expatriation, geopolitics, the meaning of life. Leave a podcast review. And joining us today is someone we'll call AJ. No, not Alex Jones, AJ. And I first discovered him through his Telegram channel, which is called Open Minds Incorporated. The link is in the description, and we'll get into more. Welcome to the podcast, AJ.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to be here.
So, as usual, my shtick, on Geopolitics and Empire is I like to talk to everyone, irrespective of their, status, so to speak. I'll have on a Ron Paul and a Robert Kaplan and an ambassador and someone that nobody has ever heard of. Because what is important for me is, obviously the content of your character and the content of your analysis. It's ideas. That's most important for Geopolitics and Empire. And so if there's someone who I think is on point, is on the frequency, let's hear your perspective. And maybe to start, your background is similar to mine, which I find very fascinating. So I've lived in half a dozen countries. I speak 3 languages at least. My Mongolian has long since left me. I've got 3 passports. And you also come sort of from a multi, what do we call it, cultural background. You lived around the planet. And so that gives you sort of further insights than just someone who speaks, one language and hasn't traveled as much. So, whatever you want to tell us about yourself and your background.
Right. Okay. Great. Yeah, indeed. So I agree. I do have a similar type of background to yourself. So I was born in Belgium, 1984. And I was born to a older generation of parents, which I think has already shaped my mind at a very young age. So my dad had me when he was 57. So he was born in 1927. So in Belgium. So that was obviously went through teenage years, you could say, or late childhood years under German occupation. So lots of family stories there that obviously have been passed on through the generation. And my mum was born in Liverpool. So again, a bit of a shaping there as well, because they met in terms of a shipping conference, which was what my dad used to do. He was part of a Belgian shipping company at the time, which was nationalized. And then he went over to Liverpool and met my dad, where they were organizing. So my mum was organizing shipping conferences. And then obviously they fell in love, and here I am. So then they went over back to Belgium, and she ended up getting a job for NATO in the civilian branch of it as a secretarial division in Brussels. So so basically both parents a bit in the international field, you could say. Trade, obviously NATO is big on trade as well, just as the shipping lines. And then when at the age of 7, we went and lived in South America, in Peru. That was because my dad was retiring in Belgium, and the Peruvian shipping lines, I said, well, if you're retiring, why don't you come and work for us for a couple of more years? And to which he said yes. So I've got 2 passports, basically the Belgian one and a British one. And I get special status because my mum was NATO, right? So I can pass on the nationality to my children, even if they're not born in the UK, right? But after that, they can't pass it on. Their kids have to be born in the UK. So I grew up speaking French in Belgium, and then it was Spanish in Peru, then went back to Belgium, finished my studies, got myself a job in a big, you could say, a clearing bank, which is called Euroclear. And I joined them in January of 2008. I was probably about 20, 21. And then the big financial crash happened 6 months later. So we had to do all sorts of restructuring, and I learned an awful lot about the banking system whilst I was working for them. So my customers were basically your big Wall Street banks and some Japanese banks. Some of them were based in Luxembourg. So I had, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. I had JP Morgan. In Japan, I had Sumitomo and Mitsubishi. Yeah, so that was the gist of it. And spent 8 years in that bank. Saw a few things, started questioning things. And one big thing that you do not do in a bank is start questioning things because, they start taking away responsibility from you. And then you sort of think, well, they're showing me the door here. So what do I do? Do I just stay at a desk job and do nothing and just rot in the corner in your booth? Or do you just say, well, give them what they want, just quit and go and live your life and try and make sense of the world? So so what happened after that? When I was 30, took myself off to Australia, as you do. You want to go as far as possible from Europe, or at least for my case, that was that. Had some very nice experiences over there. Stayed there for about 4 years. I was mainly in foreign exchange, but I was trying to get out of the banking system slowly. And then after that, in 2018, my dad passed away. So my mum moved to the UK, and I have now moved to the UK myself. That was towards the tail end of 2019. And then 2020 happened, and the whole shebang over the last 5 years.
So you're back at Airstrip One, as I like to say, and let me ask you then. I think a lot of us, as we come into this world, we are standardized, right? We don't question anything. We believe the television. We believe the structure as the society. When I was an undergrad, I went to undergrad in Illinois. I'm studying history and education, and at that point, I was starting to begin to take baby steps in peering behind the veil. But I was still, in one of the history courses, U.S. history, I was either suggested to write on Margaret Sanger, right, Planned Parenthood, and I still have the document somewhere on my files. I wrote an 8-page paper writing about this freak Margaret Sanger in a positive light. And then over time, we sort of you have to unlearn everything. And, I want to ask you, when was your, when did you transition, right, from the bot stage, as we'll call it, where you don't question anything and accept everything, to sort of escaping off of the reservation, the Jones plantation, so to speak?
Well, I think for me it was progressive, but obviously you do have some major events that sort of give you a big nudge in that direction of transitioning, as you call, right? But I think for me, one of the things that helped me, I guess, navigate a bit into that transition, so to speak, was the fact that obviously earlier on I learned how to speak different languages. So then you get immersed in different cultures, and you sort of start to see different expressions and how you translate, and how you actually can't translate everything word for word. And some jokes don't work in the other language, So that, I think, is one of the key things, is it broadens your mind to other cultures, to other ideas, if you learn different languages. So, so after my time in Peru, so I went back to Belgium when I was about 11 or 12, I had already had a completely different lifestyle, because at that age, 4 years is a lot. So when I went back to Belgium, I struggled to readapt back into that society in a way. So there was a bit of a trigger there. I'm thinking, well, why do people do this? Oh, well, in South America, they do it this way. And so, a bit of a struggle there. But I would think that probably the big catalyst, you could say, for my generation at least, was 9/11. That was 2001. I was 16 at the time, and I mean, a lot of people remember where they were when Elvis died, right? So it's just as well, probably more important than Elvis, I would say. But in terms of massive geopolitics, of course.
I'll just add, I mean, it just came to me right now. I don't usually remember where I was, but I was at Happy Foods in Skokie, Illinois. I used to work at Happy Foods as a high school kid and an undergrad, and I was working at the supermarket when I heard about 9/11. It doesn't exist anymore at Happy Foods, but anyways, continue.
Yeah. I was actually in high school at the time, and I had a little moped. I went to my girlfriend's house at the time, my first girlfriend. And I walked through the front door, and she was watching TV. And then I said, "Oh, what movie are you watching?" And she said, "It's not a movie." So I said, "Well, I recognize the two towers there from Die Hard, or from whatever Hollywood movie, or." And so I said, "Okay, it's not a movie." So I looked at it and I thought, "Well, there's been an explosion." That was my initial reaction. There's been an explosion. At that time, the first tower hadn't fallen. So I thought there's been an explosion by the looks of it. And she said, "No, it was a plane." A plane? Oh, okay, that's pretty bad. And then I watched it collapse on TV. I'm thinking, and immediately I felt there's something strange about it. I'm thinking, a plane did that? Like it crashed in the higher part of the top, well, towards the top of the tower, and the whole thing underneath just caves in. And I just couldn't put my finger on it at the time. And I was thinking, why? Like, it must have been an accident, right? But then at that point as well, the second plane had already hit as well, right? So I'm going, okay, so what's going on here? And then, immediately after that, there were, well, it wasn't quite at that time, I think, but I thought, okay, I'm going to go home. This seems to be quite important. So I went back to my parents' house. And by the time I got back, on the news, they were saying the second tower had collapsed. And within a couple of hours, Osama bin Laden, and I never heard of this Osama bin Laden. So what had happened is that then the next day at school, Belgium is quite multicultural, and where I used to live, the few immigrants, a few Arabs and Moroccans and all sorts, right? And one of them was saying, "No, it's not Osama bin Laden. It can't be, and it's the Americans." And I'm going, "What? So you're saying they did that to themselves?" And I'm thinking, well, why would they do it to themselves? You just got to trust me on this. I mean, well, he didn't make a strong case for it. Now, obviously, at the time, I'm thinking, there is something odd about it, but I'm thinking this guy, he's lost the plot, right? But there was a bad feeling about it, right? So then, but I was a teenager at the time, right? So, yeah, and I didn't think anything more of it apart from that this is not normal, something's going on. But at the same time, I never understood really what was going on in the Middle East, even in my early 20s or even mid 20s. I was thinking, why all these bad guys, all these bearded men, dictators in the Middle East? And of course, we've got to go over there and do something about it. But I'm thinking, how is it that there's so many dictators over there? So then I thought, okay, well, I need to dig a bit deeper here and see what's going on in the Middle East. I need to learn a bit about history. So that was another major sort of awakening when you get into the whole British Empire and how they redraw the lines of countries, and you get into the Opium Wars in the 1800s and et cetera, et cetera. So you start seeing the formation of empires, I guess, right?
No, and there's so many fascinating things there when you were talking about foreigners that you came across, Middle Easterners, and they see something completely different that you don't see as a Westerner. Like, if you go to Russia, you go to Kazakhstan, you go to Mexico, and you ask like a lot of people about things like 9/11, they're gonna be like, they'll laugh at you if you believe the official narrative, and then you go back home to the US, to Europe, they'll laugh at you for being a conspiracy theorist. And it's just kind of like, this is the importance of learning more than one language and traveling. And I had an experience similar. I went off to Mongolia for a little over a year and just completely isolated in the desert. And then as soon as I came back to America, I no longer felt like an American. Like, in some ways I was treated as a foreigner. I go back to Chicago to shop, and the guy's like, "Where are you from?" I'm like, I'm from Chicago." "No, you're not." And I'm like, whoa, and then I go to Croatia, where I'm ethnically a Croat. Like, I'm not accepted there as a local. I'm no longer accepted in the United States as an American. I'm a Mexican, but even as much as I tried to naturalize and get a Mexican passport, I will still never be seen, as fully as obviously as a Mexican. And so I think once you cross that Rubicon, there's almost like no coming back. But I wanted to then ask you further about, your mother working for NATO is interesting. Well, maybe was there anything that your parents or your friends of parents that would tell you that was interesting? Do you think they peered beyond the veil and just decided not to talk about it and accepted things as they were, or what?
I'm not too sure about that. I guess everything's compartmentalized in society. obviously including in the military, definitely in the military, you know, definitely. So no, there was a bit of a struggle or at least now in my mother's later days. Yes, I talked to her about all this stuff and all these books behind me and, you know, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, she sees through it now, you know, and she can see what the military have been up to. Now, but there doesn't, because it's so compartmentalized. A lot of these, because she was in a typist pool, a lot of these, you could say, letters that she had to type out didn't mean anything to them. You know, it's just needle in haystacks and just full of needles, and you just don't understand what they are really. But yeah, I mean, just talking to my mum again, it was only a couple of years ago that I found out that my dad actually, after he retired from the shipping line, he got approached by another person that retired from the shipping line, who ended up working at the World Bank, because they've also got obviously the part of their headquarters in Belgium, and so my dad was approached to go and work for the World Bank. He walked in there. My mum waited for him outside in the car for him to do his interview. He walked in there. And he walked out 20 minutes later, and he was like, "No, not for me." And that is because my dad wasn't a political guy. He was just focused on getting the job done, and that's probably why they approached him, because he's very business minded, and he probably saw. I'm guessing, and it is just pure speculation on my behalf, but because my dad was very sort of savvy and streetwise, he probably saw through some of the things that they were saying, because they do operate a bit like the economic hitman, which I think you've interviewed, right?
Multiple times I've interviewed John Perkins. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's a similar approach to the IMF and the way they sort of, subjugate some of these countries. So I think that's what ultimately made my dad turn his back against the offer. But he hasn't really seen through the veil at that, really. But I do know that in his later years, he was starting to talk about, oh, I wasn't aware that the British did this, and I wasn't aware that the Belgians did this. And so I think he was becoming a bit more aware to the world of geopolitics towards the end of his life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to always reemphasize that the alt media crowd just is increasingly going schizo, and we have to cut people slack, give grace. Not everyone is. They don't. Not everyone understands everything, and people are at different points in life, and. Just because someone like your mother worked at NATO does not mean they're a globalist. Mm-hmm. I've had the same accusations launched against some of my guests or even myself. But let me ask you then the big question that I tend to ask my guests. What do you think is going on? For me, again, I boil it down to that we have a group of global elites. It can be debated how organized they are or not, where they are sort of based or not. But I think we have, at this point, it's self-evident. There's a transnational class. They're not nice people. They've got really bad ideas. They are our enemies. They're very sinister. They want to basically bring back a neo-feudal world where there's no middle class. It's just the rich and the poor. They want to develop these digital prisons to keep us down. Like Aldous Huxley, I believe, in Brave New World, or in interviews, he talked about a final sort of revolution. He's talking about the pharmacological revolution, but that's sort of getting us to love our slavery and be locked into that cage which we can't get out of. Some of them, there were international events recently where they're talking about digital lockers, block chains, and digital lockers, right? And ultimately, these people are seeking, the end game is a world state, a totalitarian world state. I think you mentioned Cecil Rhodes. It's in their writings going back, over a century. That's kind of how I see what's going on. But sort of, what do you see that's going on, and what is sort of most interesting for you in terms of what's happening?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think my views pretty much align to yours as well. But what I would add to that. Is some of these references that you're talking about, just for those that are interested in actually figuring out where you can find some of this information. If you're into your philosophy, I would definitely recommend you read like Plato's Republic. That is an eye opener because it is. I mean, they say that the Greeks are the foundation, at least, of the British democracy and the foundation of government itself. And in there, I mean, I've actually got the book on my left hand side here. Hang on just a second. Yeah, so I've got here. I wrote down a note actually. It was page 59. Sorry, if you don't mind, I'll just read one or two sentences here. So here, what it is, it's you've got Aristotle. Socrates talking to one of his followers, and they're talking about truth and who gets to decide what truth is, right? So then they just say again, truth should be highly valued. If, as we were saying, a lie is useless to the gods and useful only as a medicine to men, then the use of such medicine should be restricted to physicians. Private individuals have no business with them. Clearly not, he said. Then, if anyone at all is to have the privilege of lying, the rulers of the state should be the persons, and they, in their dealings, either with enemies or with their own citizens, may be allowed to lie for the public good. So, if that is a foundation of some of our governments, then, yeah, I mean, it goes hand in hand that they will use propaganda, right? So that's one aspect of it in terms of history for establishing, I guess, countries and empires, is that yes, they will lie to you. Now, I was also thinking that what the end goal seems to be as well. It's just, I mean, the how can I say, the elite's understanding of what government is just to maintain order. And so if they propagandize their people in the name of defense against the enemy, whatever the enemy is of the day, they have to propagandize their own people before the enemy propagandizes their people. Now, I'm not making a case for government, but there are some, it seems to me, there are some, I mean, if you have to have a discussion about what government is, what it isn't, and what it's for, I can see why we need it, because you have so many different beliefs as well. Religion, when you put that into the mixing pot as well, it's very, very tough to so-called manage people. But then you sort of, I think, well, who gives them the right to manage people? So there's a lot of ethical stuff to untie. But equally, as you said, there's an awful lot of bad ideas out there to manage people. Now, one of the bad ideas that I'm seeing, and I've got just this theory, and I haven't looked into it yet, but I've got a theory that it seems to me, at least, a lot of civilizations that have disappeared off the face of the earth, some of them seems to me that they've peaked in terms of their technological era. And so they slowly get into a belief system where they want to transcend. And so there's this belief between to be able to divide mind from body. And you can talk about the Egyptians and mummification. You've got a more recent crowd that believe in cryogenically freezing themselves and then bring them back to life in the future. And this leads again into uploading your mind to the Borg, or whatever they call it nowadays, right? With all this singularity stuff. Now, I just think that is, again, due to an economic factor. Everything for me is driven by the economic factor, because economy and money seems to be the thing that keeps people on the hamster wheel. You're still going to work all the time, and I've got to work harder and longer because my money is now being devalued. And so until new technology comes along to increase, your quality of life, you're going to have to do as you're told. And that, unfortunately, is I think what some of the major problems that we have as individuals. So we are, I think, in the midst of a collapse of the West, and we can also have a chat, if you want, about these different sort of economic blocs. And as you said earlier on, these elites, if you want to call them that, are organized in different manners, and they are in a way competing for domination of the masses. And
just today, the Economist cover just dropped shortly before we joined on the call. They got a transhumanist cover of the Economist, and it says "Rise of the Superhuman." Of course, he's got vaccines and needles and things coming out of his brain, and the the summary says the idea of upgrading humans holds plenty of promise. Realizing it will mean driving out the cranks and bringing the technology in to the mainstream. And I appreciate your insight. I think in all of human history, everything is cyclical, and we reach a peak, and then there's a decline, whether it's from any like development in general or empire or it's almost like it's God has built in to the software where you can't get further, and then you decline. And what you're saying, it's almost like this whole transhumanist movement right now is echoes of, again, in one of my favorite books when I was a teenager, when I was 17, I read through the Bible. For me, instantly the hit was Ecclesiastes, the book of Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun, right? Solomon had endless women, concubines, and mistresses. He was the richest man ever on the planet of the earth, and he's kind of like, it's all meaningless. You can't derive joy from none of this. It's all fleeting. I'm going to die, right? And then you've got these Brian Johnsons now, and Peter Thiel. You look at this guy, he looks so sickly. Like, he looks like death. Yet I'm sure he's taking all these sorts of supplements like Ray Kurzweil to try to defeat death. Brian Johnson just started Don't Die. He thinks he's going to be immortal. Anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but maybe going back to the blocks, for me, this is at this moment very important. I'm going on major Mexican Ruben Luengas, friend now of Geopolitics and Empire. I'm going back on his show to talk about this. I think this is their goal right now as we get to the world state. And I'll get your further thoughts on the world state, because you see Trump accelerating the North American Union project, the technate, right? This goes also back to Cecil Rhodes and the British elite. It's in there. What do you call it? Schemes in there. I forget the word there. And now they're talking about U.S. dropping NATO command, which for me, that signals, so they want to create an EU army now. And I've got this crazy idea. Maybe NATO will morph into the North American Union Army, because they've got all of these sort of scripts or plans. Like Clarence Strait, who I've talked about before, wanted to create an Atlantic Union a century ago, right? Union now, and so I think this is where we're going. They're now rapidly working to get the regions into place, these blocks, and then for me, that is world government, because once you've got the blocks in place, those are your foundation stones. That's your structure for the world state. So wherever you want to go now from here.
Yeah, no, exactly. So just to quickly go back on what you mentioned, the economists there. I did see that post. You posted that today. Now, I'll just quickly share my screen, because that actually reminded me of another sort of great symbol. So just bear with me here. Right, can you see that?
Yep, it's loading. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is actually from the UK government's website, right? And the Ministry of Defence. It's in partnership with the German Ministry of Defence. And it's called Human Augmentation, the Dawn of a New Paradigm, a Strategic Implications Project. Now, hang on, the date on this, May 2021, right? And yeah, that front page, I mean, that is, for me, is the Sistine Chapel, right? It's the creation of Adam, except that you've got a human hand and a robotic hand, and in the middle you've got the DNA helix. So yeah, that's exactly to your point of what the Economist were published, because they had the Vitruvius Man, which is Leonardo da Vinci's mosaic or fresco design, if you want to say so. Right. So how do I unshare?
There should be a stop sharing somewhere. Okay. Yeah. Well, can you find it?
It is, yeah.
And while you find it, that document though is supremely important, because I remember a few years ago, a number of analysts in alt media, Daniel Esterlin and others, have pointed to that document, and I never read it in full, and so now I think you reminded me. I think it's very important for all of us to those sorts of documents, to sit down and read the whole thing, highlight it, because those are the blueprints for where we're headed. You read that stuff. This week I'm still hung up on the North American Union, because Nouriel Roubini just wrote an article saying we need a North American Economic Union. And for me, it's like red flag, because the first time I read the Bilderberg 1980 conference report, where in 1980 they talked about a North American Economic Union. So it's like, okay, once you understand that from 1980, and then you can see the trajectory, you can see where we're going. And now Nouriel Roubini is, he's linked to that same network of Bilderberg, and his job now is to normalize these projects for the masses to get our buy-in. But anyways, continue.
Yeah, no, exactly. I completely agree. So yeah, I mean, it also what brings to mind is Nouriel Roubini. Sorry, if I remember correctly, he had a nickname. Was it Doctor Doom or something? Because he supposedly was always, or at least the mainstream media portrayed him as a very pessimistic guy, and he allegedly predicted the 2008 crash and all these other things. But here he is now, writing lots of papers for The Economist, and his predictions just happened to become true, so to speak. But yeah, but it also reminds me of what you're talking about with the North American Union. It reminds me of the NAFTA agreement as well under Bill Clinton, and they also had like a plan for the, what was it called? The currency, was it
Amero? Amero, Fraser Institute. I forget the guy's name. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, these things have been talked about for a long time, and as you say, it's about establishing a new economic bloc. Now, we can talk a bit about more details if you want us to, who constitutes some of these blocs. So, in terms of your North American analysis, I would say yes, it's been discussed, at length over the last at least maybe two decades, actually more than that, 30, 40 years, right? As you said, 1980, around there. But even before that, right? But yeah, so they had the Amero, and NAFTA came to mind, and yeah. So if you want, we can talk a little bit about a bit more details about what characters maybe constitute some of these blocs. Now, one of the blocs that I see for the North American Union, or at least you could say the Trump camp, you'd have your Javier Milei from Argentina, the afuera carajo, those guys. And there would also be, what's his name, from El Salvador? Bukele, there you go. And they all seem to be going down the path of, yes, let's have Bitcoin as well. So that joins into with the musketeer and the, and you'll feel PayPal mafia, some people call them as well. So those people are some of the big backers as well. Now, the globalist camp, or I'd like actually to pick your brain a bit on that. Do you think the globalist camp, and the way what I understand by the globalists, I would sort of frame it a bit as the Anglo-American establishment, and maybe I'm a bit mistaken, but I see an awful lot of Fabian socialists in that camp of the globalists. And then you also have, obviously, your Justin Trudeau's and your Bill Clintons and your Hillary Clintons and your Joe Biden, and mainly Democrats, I would say, in the United States. You'd have most of the EU guys, or I would say on board with the globalists. And then in terms of BRICS, which is another sort of bloc, I'm not too sure where to position them, but I do know that they need a boogeyman in the West. They always seem to create this false dichotomy between left and right, or the globalists versus whatever Trump is supposed to be called. Is it conservatives? I'm not sure. So those two camps, at least the globalists and the Trump camp and the PayPal mafia, they seem to be the teams that are playing tennis back and forth, and occasionally they'll say, "Oh, it's the BRICS club," right? So that's the way I sort of see how they play, or at least for the public spectrum, the public spectacle. Sorry, the way they display these things. So I don't know. Do you think that the globalist camp are dying out a bit? Because in terms of the EU just itself, in terms of the economy in the EU, it's getting pretty bad. And I think they are going to have to align themselves or do some sort of trade agreement with either Russia or the Trump camp, or maybe China might swoop in, but that would be the BRICS camp, right?
Yeah, I just see them. They never go away. They just morph. and again, I'm coming at this from a biblical worldview where my field guide is the Bible, and I reverse engineer, and I just feel that Satan offered all of the world's kingdoms to Jesus, which implies he's managing or manipulating them. So that means we're never going to get out of this space where there are no globalists. That's my view. And what you mentioned, yes, I think there are these factions that are welded together to form this, what Mark Passio, I've referenced him, calls the occultocracy, right? So I think the HQ is Europe. I mean, Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire, they settle Britain, British Empire, right? So, and you've got these old European families and money that form this core faction, right? Venetian nobility. There, plenty of others. We don't even know exactly who they are. I don't think it's like all Venetian nobility, right? Mm-hmm. They're one group. The Vatican, all those deep, dark, secrets going back. The British elite, of course, right? King Charles and, everything that sprouted from there, Bentham and the Panopticon and the eugenics and the Huxleys and the Darwins and all that stuff. So that was that faction. And then, America didn't even exist at that time, right? So when America develops the empire, that gets plugged in, right? So now you got Washington, London, Brussels, and then when Israel is created, right? And then you have the Zionism, right? So you have the Anglo-American Zionist, but I think it's more that Europe is more important. Some people put too much onus on one, and I just feel like it's this triangle. But then I feel I have a sort of opinion that BRICS and multipolarity. BRICS was coined by a WEF young global leader, and so I'm just more of the view.
Goldman Sachs, I think. Yeah.
My view is that again, their end goal is the world state, and so they've got a portion of the world. You mentioned John Perkins, so that's what they've been trying to do with the Bretton Woods structure, World Bank, IMF, is try to take as much as the world as they can. They couldn't take it completely, and now BRICS will be the way to cover the part of the world which they can't get to. So they got one part of half of the world that they've got covered. BRICS is going to integrate the other half, and you see BRICS is on board with a lot of globalist stuff, right? Technocracy, Sustainable Agenda 2030. And so I feel like it's just going to be the two puzzle pieces, and they put them together, and we get our world states. And you see the Chinese say we want a world government. We just want a fair world government. So I think the friction is they're all in agreement, but I think the West wants to they want to be the generals, and they want, the Chinese to sort of be underneath, and that's where the friction is at. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, that last part there just reminded me of, what was this called? There was a guy who coined it the Thucydides trap.
Graham Allison, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So it's when the underdog is sort of challenging the old dog that's, the king of the jungle, so to speak. It then becomes, when he's becoming a bit too old, the underdog tries to take over. And then is it going to be done in a peaceful way where it's going to be a relay, such as like a relay race? I'll give you the baton because I don't want to collapse, and please be nice to me as you become the new king. Or is it going to be the old king's going to fight for his space and trying to, boot the young kid out, right? So yeah, that's what reminded me of that. But yeah, no, I agree. But then there's also part of myself, I'm very much aware, as I mentioned before, I'm very much aware of the language as well that we use. And so I'm not sure where I'm going with this, right? But it's just, for people to consider the terms nations and countries and all these other things, that for me, they also represent like a group. Well, they are groups, right? So some of the dangers I would think is indeed to be a part of a group, but sometimes it's good, obviously, for survival. But then sometimes I feel, or at least personally, I sometimes jump in and out of groups all the time. And it depends. I guess I don't know if it's hypocritical of myself. Maybe it is. But it's purely, I guess, more from an individual lifestyle. I want to get the best life that I can. So I always want to get a bit of not advantage is probably not the right word, but I I don't want to be at a disadvantage at the very least. So sometimes I might be part of a group, sometimes I'm not. And I think with these bigger aspects in terms of countries, I know politicians, or at least here in the UK, you have, your Sir Keir Starmer that say, "Oh, British values and our nation," and you go, "Well, I always get not confused, but I always think, well, what are British values?" And nobody ever can answer these questions. And the British interests. What do you mean? So this is why I think it's probably very confusing for people as well. All these pockets of groupthink, and it's never determined exactly. So I'm always very cautious as well, even on the bigger scale of these different economic groups. Trump, when was it? Yesterday, I think it was. He actually. I was saying to my mum, what is it, 2 days ago, how it's very entertaining to listen to some of these politicians, but it's, in terms of the old world, it's very unprofessional. For a president to make fun and to give nicknames to people in general, it's just, and I'm wondering if it's just part of the format of television, which is entertaining, and this actually goes to some of the technology that we use seems to shape our culture. And Neil Postman makes a great case for that in a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, where he sort of looks at a bit of different pieces of technology. He goes back to books being a great way to learn. And that's how mainly education was spread, at least in the United States, in the era of Abraham Lincoln. So a lot of people were highly educated, they're highly literate. And then when they ever had a presidential debate between Lincoln and whoever he was running against, they used to have 4 or 5 hour debates, and they used to have to go from city to city, and people would be there and listen. But the people that would listen would be highly educated, so the level of debates was really high. But then came the telegraph, and so it meant that all of a sudden people in California could talk pretty much instantaneously to people in New York. But what could they talk about? They didn't really have much to talk about. They couldn't actually debate a whole book via telegraph. So they just sent short messages. It was like the SMS of back in the day. So they purely wanted to use the means of communication, and that watered down the content of what they were talking about. And then television comes along, and it's a whole new ball game. It now becomes, I think he coins that in his book, Neil Postman, he coins it the age of show business, where early 1900s, he's sort of saying that radio comes in and television sort of revolutionizes some of that, where he then clearly points out, and it's still the case today, where the news is presented with dramatic effect. And they might talk about shootings and killings, and people aren't really shocked. And then you're led to believe after that segment, and I'll see you tomorrow, with again closing and dramatic captions again, right? So people aren't really shocked, and they're desensitized to some of these, you could say, horrible things in the world. And now it's even a step further, because Neil Postman wrote that book years ago, prior to the internet. Now we've got the internet, where it's no longer a one-way informational system like TV is. You're now engaging with your propaganda on social media. And I think this is probably some of the things that we're seeing in terms of mental illness. It's skyrocketed over the last 15, 20 years. And people are even more and more confused about what's going on in the world. So my take is, what moral compass and what compass do they actually have to be able to navigate and have a great life? So yeah, I mean, sorry, that was a long way around to from the topic we were talking about, but it is the means of controls of some of these economic blocks on people. Yeah, I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the future? But we've got 5 years to go, between now and 2030. And the way I sort of see it is, some of these world economic, ghouls or swamp people, if you want to call them that, they have like a shopping list, and they're ticking off as they go along. They're ticking off some of the stuff, but they'll also like be boogeymen in that list. And if people don't believe it, that's fine. But at least they've constantly made progress. And so maybe you could say maybe the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals might actually be the total goals, but it may not be. It might only actually want 10 crucial ones, and then you might not get the next 7. But that's okay, because they actually only wanted 10 of those. So there's some of that stuff I think that's playing out as well.
Yeah, and your earlier chat on media. I mean, we're getting to Marshall McLuhan territory. The medium is the message, and I still have not wrapped my. I need to do a deep study on him. I haven't really wrapped my head around his message and idiocracy. Basically, that's where we're headed. Idiocracy, and I'm coming at this from a biblical worldview. I don't think we're evolving towards this progressive utopia. I think we're actually devolving, degenerating physically over the millennia, centuries. We are actually physically devolving, and which translates into mentally, as well, devolving. And technology it's almost become like a crutch to, allow us to sort of continue in some form. But I think in many ways we are devolving, and the technology is rewiring our brains. And I was looking actually this week. You mentioned Lincoln. They used to give 3-hour. The debates was like one guy speaks for an hour at length, like one side, and then the other guy responds for an hour or something. And here you got these internet debates where it's just a few minutes here and there. The faculty back. I mean, people can just, and you mentioned, I studied diplomacy. The language, you go back, the White House spokesperson said Trump is the greatest orator. President has been the greatest orator. I'm like, I just went back and I looked at Eisenhower speaking, right? Or I like JFK and Eisenhower. Look at the way that they speak, the language that they use, and look at the people today. It's just night and day. You mentioned collapse. I'm curious because you're in Europe. The West does, it's collapsing in many ways, the West. But I'm still on the fence because there's been many prognostications of the West declining, the empire dying. I've had on Johan Daltung, who he passed a year or two ago. I've interviewed him twice. He's famous in this space for calling the decline of the Soviet Union and the U.S. empire. I've interviewed Morris Berman, cultural historian, who wrote a trilogy on the collapse of American empire. It's like we keep waiting and it's not coming. And even still today, if you want to have a better life, you go to the United States. You can get a good paying job. It's a nice place to live, wide open spaces. And so it's confusing where things are collapsing, yet they're not. Just thoughts on your, what are you seeing or feeling as regards Europe, UK, US, the West?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess back to 2008, right? We could talk about Peter Schiff, just for 2 seconds there, where he's obviously been gold bug, massive gold bug, and he kept saying, "Oh, it's going to collapse." Well, maybe I don't. Nobody can really say exactly. However, we do know that some of these overarching plans, carry through for 20, 30, 50, maybe even 100 years. I don't think I've seen a 100-year plan. Although maybe you could argue that the predecessor to Agenda 2030 was called Agenda 21, for the 21st century. So, but it seems that they've maybe reduced that into, a smaller time frame. But yeah, so they do obviously war games. They've got think tanks. They've got foundations to redirect funding. So yeah, but I know that in the UK they were talking an awful lot about. I think it was in the Blair era. They were talking an awful lot about what was the word again they were using? Austerity. Yes. And that was the word that people were sick and tired of hearing about, austerity. And but now what I'm seeing, at least, they're not using the word austerity because there'll be a backlash about it again. So they're now obviously talking about sustainability, and that is another form of rationing to me. It's call it what it is. It's, you can't do this because we have to save the planet, and you can't do that because something else. And so then the micromanagement in the banking system that seems to be heading our way more and more. Whether it's with the CBDCs that are going to be coming out. I even saw recently there was Christine Lagarde, that's the president of the ECB, saying that in October they're probably looking at releasing their digital euro, or they're bringing it forward, I think she said. So they're ready. They're pretty much ready to release some of these things. So in terms of collapse, I see your point, because they are prepared. They're just carrying it on into a new belief system, and they're rebranding it in terms of, in order to save the world or the planet, we now need carbon credits. So they are different accountancy systems, especially when they talk about net zero. Just the terminology, again, we're back to language, the terminology of net zero, gross and net, is a taxation, is an accountancy type of system. So it's just an offsetting tool. And that's all it is. Now you can put a different colored lipstick on a pig. It's still going to be a pig, right? So whether you call it in the name of saving the planet or saving the economy, it doesn't really matter. It's going to be an offsetting accountancy system to get you to alter your behavior. And so this actually just reminds me of, I don't know if you've read this book by Adam Labor, who wrote the Tower of Babel. He's a mainstream journalist. I haven't seen him for a while, but,
Actually, I got his book on my desktop here, and he did give an interview, I think this year or last year, to Danielle Cambone, who's now with Lynette Lang, ITM Trading. Yeah, so he gave an interview recently, I think.
Well, he wrote in his book, it's been a while since I read it, but he wrote in his book, The Tower of Babel, so he actually got access to what's it called again? In
BIS?
Basel?
BIS?
Yes, the BIS, sorry, thank you, yes. He got access to their vaults to have a look at some of the historical documents that they had there. And he found, Alan Dulles used to work for them for a while. And I think he even says that for about a 6-month internship, Eleanor Dulles, so his sister, worked there. And I'm not going to get into that yet, but just park that idea about Eleanor Dulles for now. But what he found in his research was exchange of letters and diaries. I think at the time it was Hjalmar Schacht, who was the German, you could say, governor of the Bundesbank, or what is now the Bundesbank, but at the time, whatever it was going by, whatever name it was. And I think he was talking about how in order to reboost the economy, because in the 1920s Germany was just flat out after the Weimar Republic, how to reboost the economy. They sort of sold to the nationalistic idea of it. They said that if you use these new, I think they were Reichsmarks, if you use these new Reichsmarks, you will own a portion of Germany. And so that was the belief, is that if you use this new currency, this new fiat currency, you will now own a part of Germany, a share of the land, actual share of the land. But obviously that was never the intention, right? So, but that actually boosted the economy, and people, all of a sudden the Reich, I can't remember exactly what the conversion rate was, but what you used to have to buy with a whole wheelbarrow to go and get your bread, you now only need just a couple of notes. So that's how he sort of energized the people to sort of get back to work and to give some sort of belief in a new currency and value, therefore. So I think this is exactly what's happening now with the economy. Yes, I think, to be honest, that the West probably should have crashed in 1971 when America went off the gold standard. And by the way, back to language, but they redefined what the definition of inflation was in 1971. Today, most people's understanding of inflation, and actually the definition, if you look it up, is just increase in prices. Whereas back then, or prior to 1971, if you got an old dictionary, if you look up inflation, it will say increase in the money supply and credit. And now I would think that the reason why it got redefined, just as vaccines and other things got recently defined, the reason why they redefined inflation is because who increases the money supply? It's the Federal Reserve and other central banks. So all of a sudden you can start pointing fingers. But they don't want to be blamed. So now they change the definition because they've went off the gold standard, and you can now point your finger at your local butcher for increasing its prices, right? So there is a concerted effort, at least, to revitalize, if I can use that word, the currency or the economy by giving it a new lipstick with these CBDCs. So it probably won't crash because most people need money to survive, and they're not ready, I guess, to be able to step out of the system if that is a possibility at all. I mean, that probably not in our lifetime.
Yeah, I can just see this slow burn. So we're in the collapse scenario, and they just are able to keep pulling rabbits out of hats. And if you listen to the podcast, you hear I'm always using the term, my favorite term, the algorithm ghetto, right? The social credit system, the 15-minute cities. And you started touching on that, and being in the UK, that seems to be ground zero. They're implementing ULEZ and death zero, as I like to call it. And it's really like, if you read their plans and what they're beginning to implement, and honestly, like, I think if you just extrapolate, if they continue to advance and get towards even halfway through or three-quarters of what they're trying to implement, it honestly looks like Hunger Games districts, Justin Timberlake's, in time, where they're in these, again, they're always in these sort of districts. I think of the video game Half-Life 2 City 17, and it's kind of like, this looks like what they're planning. And I'm wondering why, for me, the big question is, it goes back to energy and resources. How finite are our resources? Is it because we are collapsing and they control the castle, the village, and the system as we have it is collapsing, and they don't want, maybe we have finite resource or more resources, but in order not to lose us, they're creating these systems to keep us in. I wonder often, how much energy we have, or they just want to keep a monopoly on it. It's hard to fathom. But just your further thoughts, sort of on that and these digital controls, because you mentioned the digital euro. I mean, I just noticed this week it's clear that Lagarde is implementing the digital euro in October 2025. In October 25, they're also implementing the entry-exit system. So anytime you go to Europe now, they take your eyeballs and your fingerprints, and they've delayed the travel authorization until 2027. But that alone tells you that the whole point is the algorithm ghetto, because they're linking the digital currency, they're deploying at the same time of the digital mobility permissions. So it all comes together. The timing alone tells you what their goals are. And it's just every week by week, month by month, that the digital walls are closing in. I haven't been able to renew my debit card because I don't have my Mexican national digital ID. I have to go get that to be able to renew my debit now, which previously wasn't the case. So you're being a lot more and more, you're being locked out unless you submit to the digital mark of the beast. Your further thoughts?
Yes, exactly. I completely agree. So my Belgian passport expired maybe last year, and my British passport is expiring at the end of this month. So I was looking online the other day to see, okay, well, how can I renew my Belgian passport from the UK, right? And they go, okay, well, you've got to go all the way down to London. I'm living in the northwest of the UK. So it's about, I don't know, 3.5, maybe 4-hour journey down to the Belgian embassy in London. And they will require me to give my fingerprints, right? They've said that on their website that they're going to take my fingerprints because the whole of the EU is biometric. But then when I had a look on the council I used to live in Belgium, I looked on their website, and you can still do it the old way. In other words, just give some pictures, and you give them, what is it, €90 or whatever, and they'll issue you with a passport. But provided that you've got an address in Belgium, which I no longer have. But then how do I get to Belgium if I want to do it that well? All of a sudden I've got to, do illegal stuff to get my passport, but I am a Belgian national, right? So yeah. And then the UK side of it, I looked online, and there is no, far as I can tell, no biometric system yet. However, what I have noticed in the UK is that to open a bank account because I'm on the side. I'm starting a business, nothing to do with the informational space, right? So I had to open all sorts of bank accounts, and they all want you to download an app. You can't just so it has to be on a mobile phone. Your desktop or laptop is no longer. You can't just do it, online that way. It has to be mobile phone, and so you have to upload your driver's license or passport. You have to upload a picture of yourself, right? And some of them, well, most of them, are now also wanting you to take a selfie, which is also a form of biometrics. So although they're not taking fingerprints, they're taking a picture of your face and your eyeballs, right? Whereas the EU, I haven't seen them, or at least in the conditions, to take a picture of your face as such with your mobile phone, but they want your fingerprints. So as you said, we're all going in that same direction. So these digital IDs that Tony Blair is still pushing to this day, they're pretty much there. They're already there. They've been done through the corporations. Corporations have asked their customers if they want to do service, if you want our services, you have to download the app, you have to do all of this. So Tony Blair talking about digital ID, I don't know. I don't know why, to be honest, he's doing that, because it's the natural course of things. I guess all corporations are doing it anyway. And that's probably because they've all been to the Davos summit over the years, I'm guessing. Again, each time I talk about Davos, I always hear in the background, because I sometimes listen to the radio over here, and there's back in I think it was 2021, people were calling in an awful lot into radio stations, mainstream radio stations, and wanting to talk about the World Economic Forum. And one of the guys on there, you could say a conservative radio station, is called Talk TV or Talk Radio. They're pretty mainstream over here. The presenter just disregarded, I guess, the caller and said, "Oh, the World Economic Forum, not that old what is it? Old phrase or old trope again. There's nothing to it." He said, they're just a lobbying group. They're just a lobbying group. So I'm obviously laughing, but very angry as well, and sad. You go through all sorts of emotions, as I'm sure you have too. But yeah, just to dismiss it as a lobbying group. I mean, how many lobbying groups do you know are held at the mountaintops of Davos, Switzerland, and where they've got, the local police force and military funding from all sorts of governments? Actually, mainly the Swiss government are willing to fund it. And you have, thousands of people traveling in from the four corners of the planet. That's a pretty powerful lobbying group. They shouldn't be disregarded. But yeah, so it's just a bit, not very serious on their behalf. The gatekeepers.
It was just announced. Musk. I'm not a fan of Musk. I think he's one of them. But good cop, bad cop. But that with Doge, they just denied 50 million funding for World Economic Forum. And I had another thought that just slipped my mind. Anyways, that happens. But I did want to ask you about. I view in some ways it's inevitable where we're headed. And again, if you're going to call me black-pilled, often most of the people who ask me, well, what's your solution? What's your solution? Most of the people who ask those questions haven't done anything at all. And so, again, my purpose here is just to figure out what's going on. And that's always been my purpose. We talked about this in our paid subscriber chat this week. It's all individual, wherever you are, different solutions, nothing new under the sun. Throughout all of history, we've lived through tyranny, and you just do what you can with what you got where you're at. Any thoughts on mitigating living in such a system? There's been talk of absconding to rural areas. Not everyone can do that. Again, it's just going back to common sense. Do what you can with what you got where you're at. If you're living in the suburban or urban area, making sure your passport. I always make sure, like 6 months before passports expire, even up to a year, I renew everything. Using de-Googled phones, using Linux. All these little things add up, and so I just think doing what you grow. If you live in an urban area, here in Mexico, you can still have chickens and eggs and grow fruits and vegetables. And so just thoughts on, how to survive some of the madness, whether it's the algorithm ghetto or whether it's war coming to Europe, which I think it will soon, or high inflation, economic crisis. Thoughts?
Yeah. So just at the beginning there of what you mentioned about people complaining, but what's your solution, right? It just reminded me of one of Albert Einstein's quotes, right, where he said, "If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes implementing the solution." Now, this is why podcasts such as yours, I would think, are tremendous benefits to people watching, because you are trying to define the problem for them, right? Now, the solution, as you pointed out and you alluded to, is an individual one. So the way I sort of see it is you have to do an awful lot more introspecting. And so you have to think about what your place is in life. And you sometimes have to put your elbows out and make space for yourself, and try and live the best life that you can live. Now, for me, it's being more humanity. Now, you can try and define what humanity means, but for me, it means less technology. Now, I'm not necessarily a neo-Luddite, but I do suspect that there are an awful lot of people out there that are neo-Luddites, but they just don't know it yet, because they're just in the smoke of war, so to speak, right? And they're just living their day 9 to 5, and they're just absorbing everything and acting erratically. But I think the way to try and have a stronger mind, for me at least, is to read more books, read more about history, and listen to podcasts such as yours. And in that way, you can sort of understand where we come from in a more rational and a calm manner, because we are living in an irrational and very anxious world today. So to have some sort of calm and clarity in your life, I think these are important things to do, and more humanity, and try and bridge some of the gaps that people that you talk to. Try not to be so divided. And in terms of the digital ghetto, it is going to be a very hard one, because society or corporations, as I said, seem to be dictating the culture. Every piece of technology that we use is the thing that sort of imprisons us a little bit in our world. And so, but I think the only thing we can do is keep talking to people and pushing back and think more about the moral implications, the ethical implications of what we're doing and how we conduct ourselves and our behaviors, and just try and see through the empire of lies, as some people call it. So, and as I said, the earlier on, Plato's Republic there said that rulers are allowed to lie. Just be careful, try and identify some of these lies, because if you go with it, you could really hurt yourself and all the people around you. But yeah, as you said as well, some people trying to exit. I'm not black-pilled, I'm an optimist, but I don't think that or at least it doesn't seem to me in this country, in the UK, that you can actually exit, because you don't necessarily have access to land. You can't grow all the food that you need to survive in the UK either. So you will require or need to have some sort of trade going on, but you can try and form a group of people that trade between themselves and try and grow and try and have your own little community or lifestyle if you want. But it's very hard to achieve, but you do need some sort of closed economic bubble and trade bubble if you can achieve that. But so that's my solution really, is go back to the self, try and have a calm approach to things. Think before you speak. That's what I was told before by my dad many times. And try and be a bit more strategic and calm in your approach to things.
And I'll add one thing that no one in alt media talks about. What's your solution? Solutions. Memento mori, right? Remember, we're all going to die. What's your solution for death, for exiting that space? So all these things that we're talking about, again, going back to Ecclesiastics and how everything is fleeting, it's kind of like, I'm already more halfway done with my life. And the next few decades are going to be a flash in the pan. So it's kind of like all this. That's why I don't worry as much, because I won't have to live through the algorithm ghetto for that long, and I'm going to die. So, anyways, memento, memento mori. And there were some tweets that what you were discussing, it made me think of I just came across this. It's more in the Christian sphere, but still applicable to what we're talking about. Michael Foster says there are a lot of people preoccupied with trying to fix global or national problems who haven't even mastered their most basic life issues. If that's you, disconnect for a little while and redirect that energy to the things closest to you. You won't regret it. Great things start to happen. I can also apply that to myself. And Zuby, this was a funny comment. Zuby, a lot of people are familiar with him on X. He says you can just create stuff: books, songs, crafts, drawings, paintings, articles, games, videos, sculptures, buildings. Heck, even you humans. And Brian Salve, who's a Christian pastor and song maker, I like some of his stuff. He says it's true. I've created 4 full-length albums, several EPs, a book, 3 podcasts, and 7 people so far. The elites don't want you to know this, but you can just make things. And I think that's sort of an optimistic way of thinking. And I kind of felt bad that, wait a minute, this guy's a pastor. He's made 7 people. He's a musician. What am I doing? I need to do. So again, everyone is at where they're at. And any other things that are important or interesting for you? It seems like Europe is preparing for war. I feel like that is maybe related to the financial reset, but also them trying to establish the military police state to keep us plebes down as things deteriorate. So I think that is something interesting to keep in mind going forward. Anything else, comment on that, or anything else that you're freaked out about?
I'm a bit freaked out with AI, to be honest. I mean, it is becoming a big thing. I am doing on the side, I'm doing like a digital marketing course, and it's entirely funded by the Department of Education in the UK. So it's government funded, and they basically approach Google certified consultants, you could say, that band together. And then the why is it funded by government is because they are the goal, and it's clear in their description of the course. The goal is to help right? Small and medium companies to get on board with the digital technology. So I think where I am worried a little bit about the AI, or a lot about the AI, is that it seems that we are going to be outsourcing our brains even more so. And we're outsourcing not just our brains, but our creativity. So, because you can now make so many things with AI in a fraction of a second, and a couple of seconds, depending what you're doing. But you did not do that legwork yourself. You did not put in the effort. So for me, it goes again down the path of, if you want to learn and become a better person and have high standards for yourself to thrive, and that for me is the journey, and to how to be happy in life, is not to take the easy solution. I mean, sometimes, okay, don't get me wrong, it can be the better solution, but I would always try and take the harder approach, because you learn so much. And I sort of equate AI as, this is an analogy that I sort of, if you wanted to go to Australia, you could just jump on a plane, go to Australia, snap a few pictures and go, wow, Australia's great. I've learned about Australia. And then you fly back. Now, okay, you may have learned about Australia, but if you were to not use a plane and you'd have to get to Australia in a different way, you'd have to get in a car, and then you have to go on a train. You'd have to speak to so many more people, and you'd learn a heck of a lot more about the world before you even got to Australia. Okay, it's a long way around, but the journey is so much more fulfilling. So in terms of AI, you can make it sound like you and type just use the same vocabulary that you would use. It can profile you in that sense, and do it in a fraction of a second. But again, it just goes down a path of instant gratification, which seems to be the continuation of all this consumerism that we've had, at least in Europe, since, after World War II, right? Or at least in the UK since the late 50s or 60s, once the rationing ended. So for me, happiness is a struggle. It's part of the struggle of winning a battle, so to speak. And that for me is what I like to do. And AI, it can be useful, but I would probably try to not use it very much. But unfortunately, I think I probably am going to have to use it because society is going that way.
No, those are good points. And using AI in minor ways has been very helpful. But I've also been thinking a lot of what you're talking about. Like when it comes to language, right? We speak multiple languages, you and I. If there was a brain chip and I plugged it in and then I could automatically speak, Japanese without having learned it, I wouldn't like that, or writing a book. I hope one day to tackle that, to write a book. And there are people, some that I've possibly interviewed, they have like ghostwriters and they use AI. And for me, it's like, there's no self-respect in that. Nobody's perfect. I cite Rudyard Kipling, from Art of Manliness. I've got the poster in front of me, the famous If poem, right? Where he talks about, you lose everything, but without complaining, you just start again. Which evokes grit, right? Resilience, this manliness. And, if I'm going to write a book, it's just going to be me hashing it out with my mind and the text. I don't want nothing else. That is for me, grit and something truly awesome. And if you're going to cheat, like with ghostwriting or AI, I'm like, no, or learning a language. It's like that journey is, I think, important. And shortcuts for me, it's like, that's cheating. That doesn't test my mettle, right? It doesn't. So I think that's important. And by the way, I keep getting email. I got a second email from a company just today. They're following up. I haven't replied. They want to use Geopolitics and Empire podcast archive. So they're saying if you have 1,000 hours of content, you could potentially get $100,000. And guys, I am very much in need of money and financial support. And honestly, I'm tempted. But then I thought, there's a problem because most of all of my podcasts is not just me, it's with guests. No. So if it was just me, honestly, at this point, like how far we are in the digital ghetto, it doesn't cross my line yet. I mean, we're so deep into it. If it was just videos and audio of me, I would upload it to train, because they're going to use this. They need to train the AIs now, right? And this company, I think they give you a money or a cut, and then your material is licensed out to whoever else who needs to train their AIs, which includes potentially Amazon's and Microsoft's. But there's no way I can do this to my guests, right? Could you imagine we're 500 episodes now, plus I need to have their consent. I can't, Paul Craig Roberts, if Ron Paul, I can't use him to train AI. So I can't, there's no way I can ethically do that. But I did want to ask you about expatriation, because you've lived around the world. This is a topic for listeners, for myself, where to go in the world. And shout out to David Škripac, who's been on the podcast, who wrote a masterful article for Global Research, talking about his parents who fled Yugoslavia. Back in the day, you could leave Soviet Union, Yugoslavia. Today, we're under a global government. And so it's kind of like, what's the point of leaving? And so I often tell people, enjoy life. There's got to be a balance. We can still go out and about our day and living an enjoyable life. We're not yet in 1984 completely. And sometimes it makes sense to just stay where you are, or move to another town in your state, or move to another state. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to escape to Latin America, to Russia or something. But just any thoughts on expatriating in general, if people are interested in leaving their country, or if you think there are any locations that you think would be better to be in?
Well, man, I have thought about this long and hard, and it's not an easy question to answer, really. But just briefly to touch upon the passport that you said, right? It just reminded me of a passage in Charlie Chaplin's movie called the King A King in New York, and that was, I think, it was around 1956 or seven, somewhere around there. And so that was after, obviously, the silent movies. It was one of his later movies he did with his son, Michael Chaplin. And Charlie Chaplin is supposed to be this sort of like a foreign dignitary, you could say, that is going over to New York. And he comes across, I think he's in an orphanage or something. So he comes across this young fellow who's reading Karl Marx. And so he says, "Oh, are you a Marxist?" And this little boy says, "Well, do I have to be a Marxist to read Karl Marx?" And then they carry on in the discussion and they talk about passports. And the kid sort of says something like that: they shut you in and shut you out with passports, and that in this atomic age of speed, it is just sort of I can't remember the exact words, but so he's saying that how it's limiting people. So, but yeah, we've got all this technology, he's saying, but yeah, we still can't go in or out of these. You could say fictional lines on a geographical map, right? But I don't know. I mean, just to answer your question, where to go. I mean, it really depends what your lifestyle is. If you want to be a hermit, you can do that. You can go, as long as you get your passport, right? Only with the passport that was in the movie. You can try and get out, and once you're out, then you don't need to worry about the digital dictatorships, as Yuval Noah Harari calls it, because you can just live the end of your life in your little paradise in your corner of the planet. Now, to me, paradise could be somewhere in South America. I mean, I'm very fond of South America. Some beautiful scenery. You've got the whole. I mean, just for me, Peru alone, you've got the whole Pacific coast, and it's the same thing for a lot of countries down there. But you obviously got the Pacific coastline and beautiful beaches, lovely wildlife, and then you've got a bit more of a desert type of area as well. And then you get into your Andes mountains, and you got your snow, and then you get obviously into your high altitude, borders with Bolivia, for example. But then if you go into the north of the country, you've got your Amazon rainforest. So it's really a varied sort of landscape. So I'm sure you can find your happiness somewhere in countries like that. And you will find as well some traditional families and family values of people that help each other out, and that spirit of camaraderie as well. So I think if you're surrounded by a community like that and you can help each other out and get an understanding, you can live a very good life. I think that way. You don't necessarily need all this materialistic stuff. I mean, I'm sat in my kitchen here, right, in the dining table in the kitchen, and just looking at all the appliances I've got around me. It's all made in China. Now, 50 years ago, probably had an awful lot less of all these appliances. And yet I'm not necessarily wealthy. I would probably qualify myself as a middle class, I guess, not high middle class, but just average class sort of thing. And yet we've got all these things. I'm thinking, do I need all this stuff? So the quality of life, you do have it, and it might be hard to see. But yeah, I think you need to sort of, I mean, this is going, I guess, in line with some of the rationing we were talking about earlier on, but you really don't need all this materialistic stuff. You got to go back to foundations and connections with people. And that goes, with anywhere you are in the world. If you've got that connection with people, you can find your happy place, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very big on minimalism. Actually, like every week I look around, what can I get rid of in my house? And for me, what has the biggest social currency, what carries the most weight is, do I have the basics? I do. Okay, it's my relation, just people, social, talking to folks online, like yourself. In the real life, for me, you're wealthy by through relationships and experience, and not through the material world. And it's just sad a lot of people in the West have it the inverse. I mean, it's a human nature. thing, right? But you made me think of the desert. When I lived in the Gobi in Mongolia, my wife isn't down with it, but perchance if I do outlive her, I think the first thing I'm going to do is hightail it back to the Gobi. There's just something awesome being literally in the middle of nowhere, like nothing. It's just you in the desert, you and God and the earth, and nothing for hundreds of miles. That is just you're left to your own devices. That is just an amazing place to be with whichever desert. But
you just have to learn Mongolian again.
Yeah, I could probably, I've had the thought. I was intermediate in Mongolian, and they have, in Ulaanbaatar, there's language schools and teachers, and you could do quick, what do you call it? Like if you took hours and hours, you did compressed courses. I'm confident, in a month, I could probably be back. If I just went to Ulaanbaatar and did 4 weeks of intense courses, I'm pretty sure I could be right back to conversational at the very least. We've covered a lot. AJ, has been an interesting chat. Any final thoughts, and then where people can find you? I think principally your Telegram channel.
Yep. So pleasure's been all mine. Absolutely, true gentleman, very knowledgeable. But yeah, you can find me on the Open Minds Inc. or Incorporated on Telegram. That's all I have for now. But yeah, I am going to try and post more content. As you were trying to lure me into posting more stuff. But yeah, I mean, for now, obviously, I'm a bit busy right now, but because I'm setting up a business, nothing to do with the information space. But yeah, I will be posting more. I would say document-based content. I would say rather than just sharing videos, because I think people get way more out of that than just sharing articles from other people, which is a good thing, obviously. But my own stuff out there needs to go out there, because I think I can bring more value to some of the information out there. So yeah, Open Minds Inc. on Telegram.
Yeah, it'd be cool to meet. I'll be in Europe this summer, down in the Balkans, in Croatia. I've never been to UK. Given the way things are in Airstrip One, I'm sorry, I'm afraid to go to places like the UK, but maybe someday our paths will cross. Anyways, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you.